Hi trainers, Professor Seedbed here. So my mom recently went to Colorado and brought me back these healing stones, knowing that I have an obsession with religions and different beliefs around the world. Now, there was a lot of information regarding each crystal, what they were used for, what they looked like, and where they came from. But one thing that I kept asking myself is, according to what belief system are these crystals used? Like, it says that green quartz brings about prosperity because it's the color of money. Well, my first thought was, money hasn't been green all that long. 200 years, just about. Like, who came up with all of these, and how recently have they done it? I think that it's pretty common knowledge that rose quartz is the love stone. But why? And for how long? And I think a lot of people know that crystals and some rocks have some spiritual meaning, but just on a surface level. I don't think a lot of us understand where that comes from, and I certainly didn't before I started researching for this video. I had assumed that all crystal spirituality came from one religion, and I had assumed that it was an Eastern one because of how New Age organizations like Goop portray crystal healing. Since they often talk about crystal healing in combination with the Japanese technique Reiki, or in combination with things like cold therapy, which was originally found in the Edwin Smith papyrus from ancient Egypt. So, with all of these, I had figured that it came from one source and one source only. But boy was I wrong. I learned that the history of spirituality involving crystals goes very deep, and it has very complex roots. So I thought that I'd go over crystal and mineral usage in different religions all around the world in this episode of Religion IRL. In short, there's no one religion that can claim the origin of the usage of crystals in any kind of supernatural sense, in any kind of ritualistic use, or in sacred scripture. They were all present in Rome, China, India, the Americas, Egypt, and oddly enough, even in Judaism. Now, in fiction, our first account of crystals being used in any kind of supernatural way was in Plato's story regarding Atlantis. Now, this was written in 359 BC, and it portrays Atlanteans using crystals for telepathic communication. But historically, the first accounts that we have of crystals being used in any kind of sacred or religious way come from the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. These ancient Mesopotamians would carve in soft crystals like gypsum or hematite pictures or phrases in cuneiform. These crystals were said to have spiritual protection powers from malicious spirits like the Lametsu. So because of this, they would wear these crystals as talismans, or they would place cylinders around important buildings like temples or homes. They would also use burnt crystal bits of the same kind as offerings to gods or as components in spells. Now, political or local events were seen as sacred just like religious rituals in this time, which was roughly pre-3000 BCE. So just like we might have religious stories carved into these crystals, we might have important dates like the crowning of a new king or a special wedding or funeral. Which, fun fact, is how a lot of modern archaeologists know about the ancient Sumerians, because, well, they carved all their events in crystal. And so it's a really good tool to learn about their religion, history, and culture. The ancient Egyptians also used crystals for their worship and for day-to-day spiritual life, around the same time as the ancient Sumerians, which is roughly pre-3000 to 3500 BCE. These crystals were used to purge evil spirits, and they would use crystals like topaz and peridot to do so. Carnelian was used to protect one's soul as they went into the afterlife, and azurite was used to determine the will of the gods. Amethyst was used so that soldiers in battle didn't lose their courage. And it wasn't just mental or spiritual strength that these crystals were said to give. Also, they were said to have some type of physical healing properties as well. For example, quartz was used to balance out oneself spiritually and make oneself more in alignment with the god's will, but it also cured a lot of ailments that were associated with being unbalanced. Things like vertigo and instability. But not just that, tiger eye was used to cure stomach problems, and turquoise was used to help migraines. Lapis lazuli was used by females to bring about enlightenment or wisdom. Women would pound it up, crush it, and make a kind of eyeliner with it that would supposedly have the same effect. Now, it's no secret that not only women wore eyeliner in ancient Egypt, but according to my research, mostly women used the lapis lazuli eyeshadow, or eyeliner. But both genders tended to make eyeshadow out of lead, which was said to protect oneself from evil spirits, but in my experience, would most likely lead to lead poisoning and cataracts. Rubies and other gemstones were used to represent sexuality, especially with entertainers like erotic dancers. And of course, ancient Egyptians wore talismans just like the Sumerians. These tended to represent a specific god, and each crystal aligned with a god of the Egyptian pantheon, like turquoise for Hathor and carnelian for the god Ra. Now this next part is speculation, but I thought that it'd be pretty fun to include. Some people believe that pyramids were capped or lined with crystals, but to find them we kind of have to destroy the pyramids, and I don't think that scholars really want to do that. But it was believed that these crystals might imbue some kind of cosmic energy into pyramids or obelisks or other structures that the Egyptians would create. And although that is just speculation, many of the health benefits and the spiritual benefits can be found in well-known papyri, like the Kahun papyri, the Ebers papyrus, and the Westcar papyrus. Now in ancient Rome, they would use the crystals for spiritual but also legal reasons. Just like the Sumerians, softer stones were carved into. But unlike them, they would stamp the stone in wax and then on important documents. This was called an antagalo. But also, sometimes large or rare gemstones were used as offerings to specific deities, like Julius Caesar before a large battle once donated lots and lots of his crystals to the goddess Venus in the temple Venus Genetrix. Now, if you know anything about Venus, or Aphrodite in Greek, then you know that she was obsessed with beauty and love. So, anything sparkly, like a gemstone, she would absolutely be all about. And just like the Sumerians and the Egyptians, they would wear talismans of these stones, either for luck or whatever the god associated with that crystal represented as well. And because Rome was a great empire that stretched out across the known world, the gemstones could have very well come from anywhere. India, Egypt, you name it. But in the Roman world, the crystal itself wasn't the thing that was considered sacred, but whatever was carved into it. And at the height of the empire, crystals weren't just used for the elites. They were used for everyday people. And sometimes you would even have on your little talisman your lot in life, your career. And there were lots of myths regarding crystals in Rome. For example, rose quartz is actually tied to the Greek god Cupid or Eros. It was said that Cupid himself brought down rose quartz from Olympus down to Earth to spread love and romance to the humans. And because of all their myths and practices, a lot of modern crystal users might not know that their origins probably trace back, at least somewhat, to the Romans. Next, we have Taoism, a spirituality of Chinese descent. This religion contains numerous books on alternative medicines. Although, I should say that none of them are within the Tao Te Ching, which was their sacred scripture written by Lao Tzu. But there are still numerous books on this topic. In fact, modern medicine has a lot to owe to the Taoists, such as a Taoist monk stumbling across the cure for malaria that was written in the 4th century. In many of these books, it contains beliefs regarding crystals having healing properties. And they usually explain this kind of like you would explain needing more iron in the body, that every crystal has some type of nutrients that make up the stone. And so either ingesting bits or rubbing it against your skin will get some of that in your body. It was seen less as a magical rock and more like a salt lick that a cow might lick on. However, in many of the texts regarding alchemy, crystals are often used to refine one's soul and to refine things like metal into gold. The idea that crystals are able to do this and tap into our spiritual potential, as well as be a good moneymaker, inspired a lot of mythological crystals and stones such as the Philosopher's Stone, which was said to turn any metal into gold. This is a myth that has been going on since roughly King Arthur and continuing to Harry Potter. But in truth, in mainstream Taoism, crystals aren't used on a day-to-day basis normally. There are some small sects and some individual practicers, sure, but mainstream Taoism, they don't practice crystal healing on the regular. More likely, you'll see a Taoist keep a crystal around as a symbol to keep one's mind clear, as well as keep oneself in balance with the universe. Next, Hinduism is one of, if not the oldest religions in the world. And I think that a lot of people believe that India is the place where crystals having supernatural abilities originated from, and they're partially right. What most people might not know is ancient Hinduism's advanced understanding of cosmology and its ties to its practices of crystallography. The Vedanga Jyotisha is one of the oldest books written on astrology and astronomy in the whole world, and it was dated around 1300 BC in the Indus River Valley. And a lot of what is in this text is trying to find an accurate representation of the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe so that they could have temporal alignments to do certain rituals. For example, when we can see one planet or it's aligned with another astral object, then certain rituals, they said, would be more powerful. In many of these rituals, they would have a crystal that was associated with a planet or another object in the sky. Now, this crystal might have a similar color or an opposite color to the object. And when this object is visible or aligned with the Earth, it was said that the gods could channel cosmic energy into the crystal and give it some kind of supernatural abilities. Now, in some accounts, such as the Brihat Samhita, Saftika, or crystals, are used to counteract certain karmic effects. Now, these could be physical ailments, curses, etc. But it was less about the magical ability and more about a duty to Dharma to counteract something that's happened. Kind of like a blessing from a god. But the origin of all these gemstones is also very interesting. Many Hindus believe that Bali, an ancient evil spirit, was destroyed by the gods, and different parts of their body became different gemstones and crystals. His blood became rubies, his semen became quartz, and other body parts became other crystals. I found this very fascinating because in all my research, I don't think that I found another origin story for where all the crystals came from in the world. So I thought that India was pretty unique in that. And in India, they have specific words for different kinds of crystals. This is also kind of where we get the separation of basic crystals, just rocks that you can see through and that kind of emanate light, versus gemstones, which are smaller and more rare and have value. And these gemstones are called mani. And of course, there's some legends about how quartz is said to bring about luck or knowledge, but nothing really about how vibrations can impact physical ailments, like how a lot of modern spirituality might have you believe. It was much more in the realm of mythology and dharmic responsibility than anything else. And I'm sure that many of you are wondering about Buddhism, but in truth, there's not a whole lot about crystals in mainstream Buddhism, other than as a metaphor or sometimes as an offering at temples or funerals, although fruit and flowers are much more often used, because Buddhism's all about things being temporary and not lasting forever. Now, if you want to start talking about things like vibrations that crystals emit and crystal healing, the closest thing that you'll probably see are the practices in the Apache and Cherokee tribes in the Americas. There's some debate on how recent these practices came about, with some saying that it is ancient and has roots that span hundreds or thousands of years, while others believe that it's a more modern tradition that has come about since the colonization of the Americas. Nevertheless, this is still a very valid spirituality and a very valid form of belief. What these tribes practice is crystal healing, where a religious figure or a healing guide would place a patient in a sacred location connected to nature. They would then place stones, specifically crystals, around an inflicted area of the patient's body. The patient would then need to go in a kind of deep meditative or prayer-like state, focusing a lot of their energy and respect onto these crystals, and taking deep breaths, representing the breath of life. Now, these tribes have what are called the fundamental laws of healing. These must be followed for the ritual to be done well. These laws include unconditional love, intention, and non-attachment. I would say that this Native American tradition is used to connect oneself with nature, but knowing how many Native American belief systems work, there is no separation between humans and nature. So that would kind of be inaccurate to say. A more accurate thing to say would be it's just another type of healing. There are, and were in ancient times, many tribes that followed more traditional methods of medicine. Things like herbs, cooling sacks of water, rest, and even some types of surgery. Tribes use crystals in the same way that they use sage or ritual hallucinogens. Not often, and only few tribes actually do it. But seeing it still wouldn't be out of the ordinary depending on where you were and who you were encountering. But enough of these pagan crystal practices, let's get into some good Jewish Abrahamic crystal sacredness. Now, crystals obviously aren't worshipped in Judaism, but they play an extremely important role. In Exodus 28, 15 through 30, we see Aaron having a breastplate that is made of 12 different crystals, each of which represents a tribe of Israel. And later in scripture, we see a cherubim, usually referenced as Lucifer, having a similar breastplate, but it is missing an entire row of crystals, which means that not only do those specific tribes have a very important role to play in the kingdom of heaven, but these crystals represent something greater than themselves. So perhaps Christians and Jews do not worship crystals. However, it was important that Aaron had very specific crystals and gems, and that Lucifer did not have them, indicating some type of incompleteness or inferiority. So some holiness is represented within those crystals. Also connected to Judaism is Kabbalah. Many of you may have heard of this, as it's the most popular type of Jewish mysticism. Now, when it comes to mysticism like Kabbalah, Santeria, or Wicca, I really don't know too much about them. But after doing research, I know that they are all users of crystals when it comes to things like their spells or their rituals, in fairly similar ways to how the Sumerians used them in their spells. But I think that when people hear about those, they think of the term witchcraft, which is kind of derogatory, and I wanted to stay away from. So I don't mention them too much in this video, but just know that they are also users of crystals in their traditions. Now, we've seen crystals being used in antiquity and in lots of other faiths. But what about the New Age spirituality movements? Well, I tend to be drawn to Goop's page on crystals and spiritual energy. Goop is Gwyneth Paltrow's company of New Age healing and spirituality, and Colleen McCann is their expert on crystal healing. Now, she describes crystals as extremely ancient and as one of the first things in Earth's history to ever form. And because of this, apparently these crystals have a wellspring of knowledge and information that humans can draw from. She explains why this is similar to crystals being used in TVs or phones or computers, because they hold information. These crystals can also absorb energy, emotional or otherwise. So, for somebody wearing an engagement ring, that diamond might absorb a lot of the energy regarding that relationship, both positive and negative. Each crystal becomes attuned to its user, and each crystal, with its own special vibration, comes with superpowers, which is the term that they use on their website. For example, carnelian is often used to aid in processes of female reproduction. So if somebody wants to get pregnant, that's what they would use. And they would often be used in combination with some type of meditation, just like the Native American tradition that we just went over. But if you use a crystal too much, they can become impure or dirty, and they need to be cleaned, either through absorbing full moonlight or by using isopropyl alcohol, or other things. And I'll admit, I thought that a lot of these beliefs were extremely odd, but I didn't bat an eye when I learned about other religions. So I think that while we may see this as odd, we can also just see it as another extension of somebody's spirituality or their religion. The conclusion that I have come to is that, like fire, water, or air, crystals bring about a certain mysticism to them, something solid yet see-through, something that looks like it could even emanate light naturally. And these precious stones have been the basis of our economies, our architecture, our spells, etc. And the New Age crystal movement is no exception. In a world that's so connected, I'm not surprised that some spiritualities have found that almost all religions have that in common, that there's some connection to crystals or valuable gemstones. And so that they've thought that there might be something to that, and they've added their own logic and their own reasoning. In truth, they believe that they're connecting themselves to something greater, and, well, we can't ask for much more than that. Some people might consider crystal healing as some type of pseudoscience or nonsense or a hoax to make money, but I see it as simply another spirituality, and one that has taken inspiration from many, many different religions across time. It's just as valid as somebody in Zoroastrianism believing that fire is holy, or in Christianity believing that holy water has some sacredness to it. And I'm not saying that this religion is right or wrong. That's just not what I do on this channel. But I like to promote tolerance and acceptance, and I think that just because it's new doesn't mean it's weird. Real quick before I go, a lot of the information that's used for the history of crystal healing is unreliable and biased. So I'd like to thank one source in particular that was scholarly and extremely useful in this video. A lot of the information from this video came from an anthropology thesis paper by Kristine D. Carlos of the University of Florida. I'd like to thank you, and her work will be the first one in the description down below. Thanks so much for watching. I've got another video right after this that's kind of a companion video that involves Pokemon. I hope you check that out if you have time. In the meantime, this is Professor Seedbed signing out. See ya! Hey, I'm back in a different outfit and with a different haircut. Thanks so much for watching my video. There are entire YouTube channels dedicated to this topic, so I really just scratched the surface. Do you want to hear more about crystals or things like the 12 universal laws? Things that I wasn't able to cover, but I would love to. Leave a comment down below letting me know. Also, like I said, there's a companion video to this one. Check that out right over there. And check out some of my other videos. And comment and subscribe if you like. I've got a lot of cool stuff coming out soon. I hope to see you there. Have a great one.